Thank you all. It's a real pleasure to have the chance to be with you. I'm just going to take a couple of minutes to offer some introductory comments. One of the things that struck me is that for so long, I heard that it's important for companies to be innovative and manufacturing is less important. Right? How many of you have heard that? That innovation's how you compete and manufacturing is the stuff that's a commodity, don't worry about it. I think that's an extraordinarily outdated view of what manufacturing is about. And we think about the technologies that we've been discussing or will be discussing and that many of you are familiar with. Manufacturing itself is now becoming a huge locus of innovation. And the kind of transformation that we've seen digitization have on, say, the retail sector, none of us shop the same way today that we did 15 years ago, we're going to see equally transformative effects on the manufacturing sector. So manufacturing is going to become a locus of innovation in of itself. Second, I think manufacturing is playing and will increasingly play a more important role in the product innovation process itself. So manufacturing innovation will increasingly enable product innovation. And so if you want to be a good product innovator, you're going to have to be excellent at the manufacturing, and the new technologies are going to enable a lot of that. The final point is really not about the technology. What we know from history is that every time there are major waves of technological change, the winners versus the losers are not necessarily determined by who was better at the technology. In fact, over time, everybody kind of gets access to the technology, and the technology doesn't become the differentiator. What becomes the differentiator is the creation of new organizational practices, new processes, new structures, new business models that enable the maximum exploitation of the technology. And so that's a message that I want to leave with you is, at the end of the day, it's not going to be about the technology. It's going to be about the creative and inventive management practices and business models that are going to really differentiate the winners versus the losers. A comment that I think connects these two in terms of what the landscape is and where I think the bottlenecks are and where we need to go in the future. So I mean, I sort of think about the big picture as whatever terminology you want to give it. Say Internet of Things you have sensors and you've got some software capability and some software platforms, and then you have analytical tools. Which is the big data part, right? So I think historically, we had bottlenecks in all places. We couldn't collect the data off the shop floor. Whatever we collected, we literally hand-typed it in, and we didn't have things were not connected. Increasingly, we were able to start connecting things, the first ERP systems, but we still lacked the real-time data. Now we're starting to get the sensors, and we have a long way to go, but we're starting to get the real-time data, and we've got the capacity to process it. The bottleneck now is actually on the analytical tools to make sense of that data. So if I go back to Jerry's comment about the morning meetings that you don't have, and you've got this data, what does it mean? How do you know if that problem's been repeated, and how do you get to root cause? And I think there's a huge amount of stuff that we can still be doing, that we need to do, because again, if you just keep getting the data and more data, and it's analyzed and distilled, but you don't quite know what to make of it. And that's actually where the analytics come in, and I think that's emerging as the bottleneck. I mean, the sensors they're happening, and they're going to continue to happen. Computer horsepower is going to continue to pick up, and we're going to get all that. But the analytics now is really the bottleneck. It doesn't, because I mean that's been kind of the productivity improvements. Technology we know over time drives productivity improvement, but it happens with lags. But the data is correct. Our productivity growth has slowed since the late 90s. We kind of went through a boom in the 90s, went above the historical norm, and since the early 2000s, our productivity growth has kind of regressed back to the historical average or even somewhat below that. But why is that the case? I think two things. One is there's just a natural lag as you start to invest in technology. You're investing capital, so that's an input. And it just takes a while for it to learn how to use these things. And so that actually will, in the short term, depress your productivity, both at a kind of national level or firm level. And then I think the second thing is part of what Jerry mentioned and I mentioned, which was the improvement starts to come when you learn how to use the technology. So it's the adaptation or adoption of new business models and new organizational structures. And again, that takes time. In fact, it's a lot easier to go out and buy a bunch of automation and stick it on the floor than it is to actually change the way your organization operates. And so, I'm not surprised. I'm optimistic companies will get there because they figure it out pretty fast that, just investing in the technology without doing the rest isn't a very good payoff. So I think we'll see that. Yeah. I think we'll see it. I can't tell you exactly when, but I think we'll see it. And you have to be able to learn from them, because if you think about value of information it's completely related to the decisions you make. Think about it. Why do you need information? If you have a decision to make. If you have no decision to make, you don't need information.
Right.
And therefore, you have to understand the decisions which get made on the shop floor if you're going to kind of craft the right tools and the right information. Otherwise, you provide them information they don't need, and that's just valueless. Well, I think it's going to vary a lot by sector. I think, obviously, what a leader needs to have familiarity with the technology. They don't necessarily have to be the technical expert, but they have to have a feel and an appreciation for it. I think that's going to be key. I think you're going to find more of that in some sectors than the others. I mean, obviously, a company like Microsoft,
you guys are
it'd be shocking if people didn't understand digital. It's kind of the world you operate in. On the other hand, if you're a food manufacturer, that probably hasn't been part of kind of the equation. And so that's a whole new skill set that has to be developed and a mentality. I think the leadership is going to be critical because it's a long-term commitment. You don't do this stuff today and have a payoff tomorrow, as I mentioned. So you have to have a strategy and a path that you keep pushing ahead. And the job of leadership is to keep pushing that against the kind of inertial forces and things that tell you to stop and things that tell you to wait, we're not quite ready. And you got to run a lot of experiments, and there's going to be failures along the way. You don't just do this stuff and it works all perfectly just like they drew it up. It's going to be 2 steps forward, 1 step back, some positive and negative surprises. And again, it's leadership who keeps pushing the organization, gives it permission to experiment, learns and adapt. And so I think it's going to be critical in terms of the culture as well as the strategy part.